Imagine, if you can, this seemingly peaceful stretch of Long Island coastline. Beautiful place, right? But for, well, over a decade, it held this truly terrifying secret. We're talking hidden remains, multiple people, pointing to this relentless hunter whose identity just vanished, eluded everyone for so long. Think about the fear, the whispers. Is there a serial killer just walking around? Today, we're doing a deep dive into one of the most haunting, really complex true crime stories in recent memory, the Gilgo Beach murders, and of course, the arrest of Rex Heuermann. For more than 13 years, this case just baffled law enforcement, gripped the public. So our mission here is to, piece together that fragmented timeline. We want to explore the evidence, the breakthroughs that seemed almost impossible, and really try to understand the man now accused, Rex Heuermann. What does this all mean for the victims' families after all this time and for the case going forward?
Absolutely. And we're looking at a really comprehensive amount of material now. A lot has come out recently, with renewed efforts, public reports. It gives us a much clearer picture than ever before. So this deep dive is about getting the full scope. From that very first hint of horror right up to the latest charges, it's about connecting dots that were just out of reach for way too long.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. Not with a discovery, but with a disappearance. The one that kind of unexpectedly blew the lid off everything. May 2010. Oak Beach, near Gilgo. Shannon Gilbert, 23 years old, an escort from New Jersey. She makes this frantic 911 call in the early morning hours.
Right. And the things she said on that call, chilling, there's somebody after me, and these people are planning to kill me.
Yeah. Reports say she was running through the streets, knocking on doors, screaming, and then she just disappeared. Vanished.
And initially, all the focus was on finding Shannon. Police searched, canine units, the whole thing. They scoured those marshy areas near Oak Beach. But months went by, no sign of her. And honestly, investigators had no clue, not at all, about the sheer scale of what they were about to find. It really shows you something, doesn't it? How sometimes a search for one missing person can just accidentally uncover a much larger, darker pattern. Makes you wonder how often that might happen.
Exactly. And the big shift, the moment everything changed, was December 11th, 2010. A police officer in his canine Blue, they were actually out on a training exercise. Still looking for Shannon, technically.
Right, along Ocean Parkway. And the dog, Blue, alerts to something in the brush. And they find human remains wrapped in burlap.
Just like that. And then, only 2 days later, December 13th, it gets so much worse.
That's when the horror really unfolds. They do a wider search of that same area, and within just a quarter mile, they find 3 more sets of remains. They were later identified as Melissa Bartholomew, 24, Megan Waterman, 22, and Amber Costello, 27. Together with Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25, who was identified a bit later, they became known as the Gilgo Four.
The Gilgo Four. And the pattern was immediate, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely chillingly clear. All 4 women were involved in sex work, all petite, and their bodies found in very similar ways, bound, sometimes with taper belts, and wrapped in that same type of burlap. The consistency, the method, the location, it just screamed single perpetrator, someone methodical, organized.
And then there were the phone calls. The killer actually used the victim's cell phones after they were gone.
Yes, that's one of the most disturbing parts. In Melissa Bartholomew's case, he called her teenage sister Amanda. Imagine getting that call.
Horrifying. He apparently told her he'd hurt Melissa, that he was responsible for her passing. Just pure torment.
Psychologically, those calls are, well, they're significant. It's incredibly risky behavior for a killer, right? It creates leads. But it points to this profound need for control, maybe to relive the act or even inject himself into the family's grief. It suggests a really big ego.
Like he thought he couldn't be caught.
Exactly. Believing he's smarter than everyone else. But that kind of arrogance, that need to taunt, that's often where they make mistakes. Critical mistakes.
So the search for Shannon Gilbert continues into 2011, and they find more remains.
Yes. Further east along Ocean Parkway, miles away from the Gilgo Four, they found partial remains of Jessica Taylor, who was 20, and Valerie Mack, 24.
Partial remains. What does that mean?
It means other parts of their bodies had been found much earlier and elsewhere. Jessica Taylor's other remains were found way back in July 2003 in Manorville.
2003, wow.
And Valerie Mack's partial remains, even earlier, September 2000, also in Manorville.
So this killer potentially was active for years, maybe a decade before the Gilgo Four.
That's what the fragmented discovery strongly suggested, a much longer timeline. And the discoveries kept coming. They found an unidentified toddler, an unidentified Asian man found wearing women's clothing. Later, the toddler's mother was identified Tanya Denise Jackson, also known as Peaches, from a tattoo.
Peaches, right, I remember that.
And Karen Vergata, initially called Jane Doe number 7. So in total, eventually 11 sets of remains along that parkway.
11.
Yeah. And you can understand why initially investigators thought, okay, this can't all be one person. The variety, age, gender, circumstances, the different locations. It seemed like maybe multiple killers were using the area, which of course complicates things immensely.
Okay, so you've got all these horrific discoveries, this clear pattern emerging with the Gilgo 4, the older remains, suggesting a long timeline. You'd think the investigation would just kick into high gear, right? Full speed ahead.
You would absolutely think that. But this is where the story gets incredibly frustrating. Despite those early clues, the investigation, it just went cold. For years.
Why? Was it just lack of leads?
That was part of it, maybe. But there were bigger issues, systemic issues. For one, the initial perception of the victims because they were involved in sex work.
Ah, the stigma.
Exactly. Shannon Gilbert's mother, Mari, she famously talked about being dismissed by police initially. Like, her daughter's disappearance wasn't taken seriously because of her lifestyle.
That's heartbreaking. Victim blaming.
It absolutely permeated the early stages. This idea that they were isolated victims, maybe less urgent cases, it hindered things, delayed justice. Thankfully, the families were relentless. They used media, social media, kept pushing, kept these women's names out there. They refused to let them be forgotten. Their persistence was crucial.
But it wasn't just societal bias, was it? The sources point to serious problems within the Suffolk County Police Department itself.
Oh, absolutely. This is a huge factor in why the case stalled. There were major allegations swirling around corruption, ineptitude particularly involving the police chief James Burke and the district attorney Tom Spada.
What kind of allegations?
Reports claim Burke actively limited cooperation with other agencies. Specifically, he obstructed the FBI's involvement. Can you imagine?
Blocking the FBI on a serial killer case.
Apparently so. Removed top detectives from the case, potentially stalled crucial steps. It wasn't just mismanagement, it sounds like active obstruction. It shows how internal politics, not just lack of clues, can completely derail a major investigation.
And didn't Burke have his own huge scandal going on? Something about a stolen bag?
Yes. That's the other layer. He got caught up in this whole mess involving stealing a duffel bag from a suspect's car, then allegedly assaulting the suspect who stole it, and then a massive cover-up.
So the leadership was completely distracted.
Totally preoccupied for years, basically from late 2012 to late 2015. While Burke and Spada were fighting federal charges and trying to save themselves, any real progress on the Gilgo Beach case just died. The people who should have been laser-focused on finding a killer were focused on their own legal survival. It makes you ask, what happens to justice when the system protecting it is compromised from the top? The impact on this case was devastating. Years.
Just years wasted. Okay, so after all that stagnation, the internal chaos, the lost time, things finally change. January 2022, a new task force is formed.
Yes, a crucial turning point. This time, it's a truly collaborative effort. The Suffolk County DA's office, the sheriff, state police, and importantly, the FBI is fully integrated. No more roadblocks.
And the strategy was basically fresh eyes on old evidence.
Exactly. Go back through everything, every file, every note, every piece of data collected over the past decade plus. And it's amazing what happens when a new unified team looks at old information with modern tools and, frankly, renewed commitment. Details that might have seemed minor back then or couldn't be fully analyzed suddenly take on huge significance. It wasn't necessarily about finding brand new clues out of nowhere, but seeing the connections in what they already had.
And those fresh eyes found something specific pretty quickly, right? A witness description.
A really pivotal one. It came from Amber Costello's roommate, Dave Schaller. He remembered a client of Amber's, described him as a large-built man, kind of like an ogre.
An ogre, okay.
But the key detail, he drove a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, a specific type of truck.
That's very specific.
Extremely. And that detail became a powerful lead. The new task force started cross-referencing registered owners of that specific truck model with cell phone data linked to the victim's last known locations or the burner phones, and bingo. Rex Heuermann pops up as a potential suspect in March 2022. Why? He owned a first-gen Chevy Avalanche, and he lived in Massapequa Park, a location that kept pinging in relation to the burner phone activity.
Wow. So that one visual detail combined with the location data.
It was the breakthrough.
Yeah.
It just shows how vital even seemingly small details from witnesses can be, especially when combined with modern data analysis. It completely shifted the investigation towards him.
Let's talk about those burner phones. They were a big part of this, weren't they?
Huge. The killer used these specific, untraceable phones to contact the victims beforehand. You know, the kind you buy with cash.
Disposable.
Right. And then, chillingly, use them, or the victim's own phones, to make those taunting calls after they were gone.
So how did they connect those burner phones to Heuermann, especially years later?
This is where the data analysis got really impressive. Even with old records, sometimes pieced together from billing or historical cell tower data, they could map things out. They found that the locations where these burner phones were active and the locations where Heuermann's personal cell phone was active often overlapped. Critically, in places like Midtown Manhattan near his office and Massapequa Park near his home at the relevant times.
So his personal phone and the burner phones were basically shadowing each other.
Precisely. And it went further. They uncovered multiple fake names he allegedly used. John Springfield, Thomas Hawk, Hunter, 1903, Andy Roberts tied to online accounts, burner phones, likely for soliciting sex workers or other illicit things.
That shows a lot of planning, right? Trying to cover his tracks.
A clear, deliberate pattern of evasion, trying to create distance, anonymity. But those digital breadcrumbs, however faint, eventually led back.
Okay, so they have the truck, the cell phone data pointing strongly at him. But they needed something more direct, right? The smoking gun.
They did. And they found it in a tiny piece of evidence from way back in 2010. A single male hair found on the burlap that was wrapped around Megan Waterman's body.
Just one hair, waiting all those years.
Waiting for the right technology, the right suspect to compare it against. And the way they got his DNA for comparison, pretty clever investigative work. January 2023, Heuermann is under surveillance. Investigators watch him discard a pizza box in a public trash can outside his Manhattan office.
The pizza box DNA. I remember hearing about that.
Exactly. They recovered it, swabbed a leftover crust, and the lab results. Astounding. His DNA profile was a match, well, technically consistent with the mitochondrial DNA from that hair found on Megan Waterman.
Consistent enough to exclude almost everyone else on the planet.
Excluding 99.96% of the North American population, according to the reports. It was the critical forensic link they needed, directly tying him to one of the Gilgo 4.
But then there was also female hair found on other victims.
Yes, another complex layer. Female hairs found on Megan Waterman and Amber Costello were found to be consistent with Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup, or potentially other female relatives who shared that maternal line.
So what does that mean? Was she involved?
That's not what the prosecution alleges. It's crucial to state. Asa Ellerup was confirmed to be out of state, traveling, during the times these specific murders occurred. She hasn't been charged or named a suspect. The theory is transfer DNA. Basically, hairs from his wife or daughter, present in their shared home or maybe his car, could have transferred onto him and then onto the victims or the materials used.
Like shedding, basically.
Exactly. It highlights how forensic science works. Even trace evidence from a shared environment can become part of the picture. It doesn't necessarily imply involvement, but it further ties the crime scene materials back to Heuermann's known environment, his home life. It's incredibly meticulous science.
So let's talk about Rex Heuermann himself. Who was this man living this apparently normal life?
Well, at the time of the latest charges, 61 years old, an architect. Ran his own firm in Manhattan, RH Consultants and Associates, lived in Massapequa Park in the house he grew up in, married, 2 adult children, a daughter and a stepson.
On the surface, completely ordinary suburban family man.
Totally. That was the facade. But the details that emerged paint a very different picture. People who knew him way back, former classmates, described him as awkward, a loner, someone who was bullied.
Okay, so maybe struggled socially.
Seems like it, but professionally.
Yeah.
A completely different persona, known as a troubleshooter, really good with complex NYC building codes. He apparently boasted about knowing how to outwit the system.
Outwit the system. That's chilling in this context.
Isn't it? Colleagues described him as overly confident, even pompous, having this swagger and cockiness. It's this stark contrast, the awkward loner versus the arrogant professional, suggests someone very compartmentalized, hiding a lot.
And there were disturbing hobbies too, right?
Yeah.
The hunting connection.
Yes, he was an avid hunter. And when police searched his house, they found this huge arsenal, nearly 300 firearms in a basement vault.
300 guns.
Well,
Wow.
And that burlap used to wrap the victims. It's the kind hunters often use. That connection seems significant to investigators.
There was also that story from a coworker about him saying he could find her anywhere.
Right, Muriel Enriquez. She recalled him sending her photos from his hunting trips while she was on a cruise with a note saying something like, "Told you I could find you anywhere." Just deeply unsettling. It hints at that predatory stalking mindset.
And his online activity, that was deeply disturbing too.
Extremely. Investigators uncovered thousands of searches. For sex workers, yes, but also for incredibly violent, sadistic torture pornography.
Yeah.
And very disturbingly, child pornography.
Just awful. And he searched for the Gilgo case itself.
Compulsively. Searched for news about the investigation, images of the victims, even pictures of their family members, over and over again.
What does that suggest? Why would he do that?
It suggests a profound obsession. Maybe wanting to relive the crimes. Maybe monitoring the investigation to see how close they were getting. A need to stay connected to it, control the narrative in his own mind. It really shows how digital footprints, even ones you think are private, can expose the darkest secrets.
And then there's the document found on his computer, the quote-unquote blueprint.
Probably one of the most chilling pieces of physical evidence recovered from his home, a Microsoft Word file. Created back in 2000, the year Valerie Mack vanished, and it was modified up until 2002.
And prosecutors believe this was literally a planning document for murder.
That's the allegation. A blueprint for his crimes. The contents are just horrifying. It had categories like problems listing things like DNA, tire marks, fingerprints, potential evidence to avoid.
Like a checklist for not getting caught.
Exactly.
Right.
Then a section for supplies rope, cutting tools, gloves, bags, tape, all the potential tools of the trade. It also had acronyms. DS, believed to be dump site. TRG, thought to mean target, indicating planning around victims and locations.
This is methodical to a terrifying degree.
It gets worse. There was a section labeled body prep, and it included the instruction, remove head and hands.
Oh my God. And Valerie Mack.
Valerie Mack's remains, found back in 2000, were missing the head and hands. The alignment is just horrific. It points to an almost unbelievable level of cold, calculated premeditation, planning these acts out step by step.
So Heuermann is arrested, initially for 3, then 4 of the Gilgo 4 murders. But the investigation didn't stop.
Not at all. The task force kept digging, kept reevaluating evidence with new technology, and in June 2024, they charged him with 2 more. Jessica Taylor from 2003 and Sandra Castilla, whose passing was way back in 1993.
1993. That case wasn't even initially linked to Gilgo, was it?
No, it was often thought to be unrelated, which shows how this new investigation is connecting cases previously thought separate.
And then even more recently.
December 2024, he was charged with the 7th murder. Valerie Mack, whose partial remains were found back in 2000 and whose planning seems to be reflected in that horrifying document.
7 victims now officially linked through charges.
7. It really demonstrates the power of this dedicated task force, combining old evidence with new insights, particularly advanced DNA work. It's a prime example of how arresting a suspect in one cluster of crimes can potentially unlock answers in other, much older cold cases.
So where does the legal case stand now? Heuermann was arrested in July 2023.
Right, arrested leaving his office in Manhattan, reportedly quite surprised. He has pleaded not guilty to all 7 charges, maintains his innocence.
And he's awaiting trial.
Yes, he's being held at the Riverhead Correctional Facility in Suffolk County. No trial date set yet. There are ongoing legal arguments, as you'd expect, complex issues around DNA evidence, whether the cases should be tried together or separately. It's a massive, incredibly complex case to bring to trial.
And the impact on his family must be immense.
Absolutely devastating, by all accounts. His wife, Asa Ellerup, filed for divorce very quickly after his arrest. Reports indicate she and the children are facing significant financial hardship. There's apparently a documentary deal in the works for them to tell their side of the story.
And the investigation might not be limited to New York, right? Other places are looking at cold cases.
That's correct. Jurisdictions where Heuermann is known to have connections: Las Vegas, South Carolina, where he owned property, including that Chevy Avalanche. They're reviewing their own unsolved cases.
So the question lingers. Could there be more victims?
It's a deeply unsettling but necessary question. Given the alleged timeline, his known travel, the potential for activity spanning decades, it's certainly possible that this breakthrough could lead to answers in other unsolved disappearances across the country.
And there was that woman, Nikki Brass, who came forward.
Yes, a hairdresser who said she encountered Heuermann years ago when she was working as an escort. She described feeling this intense fear around him.
And didn't she say he brought up the Gilgo bodies?
Chillingly, yes. She claimed he specifically asked her about the Gilgo Beach case, how someone could dispose of bodies like that without getting caught. Now, that's anecdotal, not court evidence, but it offers this potentially terrifying glimpse into his alleged mindset, his
It's
obsessions.
just incredible. We've covered so much ground here. Over a decade of mystery, frustration,
Yeah.
and now this painstaking unraveling. From Shannon Gilbert's desperate 911 call, which inadvertently started it all, to that pizza crust DNA finally providing a key link, this Gilgo Beach deep dive shows a story just far more complex and disturbing than maybe we even realized.
It really does. And it's a testament to the persistence of investigators who wouldn't give up, combined with these huge leaps in forensic technology. DNA, cell data, tools that finally allowed them to connect the dots. The story of Rex Heuermann and these victims is just this powerful, though incredibly sad, reminder that sometimes the answers are there, hidden in plain sight maybe, just waiting for the right moment, the right technology, the right dedicated eyes to finally see them.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? As you reflect on this deep dive, consider how many other cold cases, these long unsolved mysteries, might just be waiting for that one overlooked clue, that one new perspective, that one advance in science to finally bring answers after so much time. Makes you wonder what else is out there, just waiting to be found.